We are talking Prey from 2024, also known as Kalahari, which is the area in which this movie kind of takes place. Now, this is kind of a survival, horror, thriller, action movie, and it focuses on a chartered plane which crashes in the Kalahari area, which is a mixture of kind of grassland and desert in Africa. And on this plane we have the pilot, we have a small group of tourists and their guide, along with a couple of missionaries who are escaping this kind of local warlords that kind of want to effectively kidnap American prisoners. And this group of people must now kind of survive the elements, obviously the blistering heat with very little supplies. We've got obviously lions, as you can probably tell from the poster of this one, which is kind of our main threat, but you've also got other animals, hyenas, snakes, scorpions, all out there causing a problem, as well as the actual militia who is kind of hunting for these two kind of missionaries. Now, what will happen? You'll have to watch the movie and find out. So let's talk about the title first of all. I mean, Prey. I know the original movie was called Kalahari, but I don't know, calling it Prey to me, it's a little bit of a generic title, and obviously we've had the kind of Predator movie that was called Prey. Maybe they should have called it Prey/Predator or something. I don't think the somewhat generic title of this movie is going to help it in any way, because it's just going to get lost in search traffic. And the other thing is, yes, I have dressed for this review. Thank you very much. Anyway, let's discuss what works in this movie's favour. Okay, now, it's a lower budget movie, but I do think it still has a reasonable production budget for a lower movie. You've got some recognisable faces in this movie. Emile Hirsch, Ryan Phillippe and Mena Suvari. So you've got, you know, some reasonable actors. This isn't your Michael Parés and your Danny Trejos. These are relatively kind of well-established actors who are known for acting rather than kind of being in tons of B-movie schlock, although Mena Suvari admittedly has been in a good few. And, you know, so you have got a core cast here of recognisable and experienced actors. The second thing is, obviously, I do think this movie actually does have some nice photography in it. It doesn't always. There are some shots which involve green screen, which I don't think look very good, but a lot of the time I would say the movie does look fairly good. I mean, there's a great shot, for example, where they have once they've crashed, there's a fire that's kind of going to try and scare off any predators, and it goes out. And once the fire goes out, you just see the eyes in the darkness of the kind of the lions that are sort of surrounding the area. And I think it looks great. It's a great shot. And there are kind of a few other kind of like sequences, I think, here that I think look pretty good. We have you know, quite a decent kind of scary kind of plane crash. Now the movie is somewhat minimalistic with the violence, and I feel it's partially a choice and partially budget constraints. Now, budget constraints, I would rather them kind of write around it rather than having rubbish looking VFX. And I feel that's probably what they've done here. So we don't see much of the crash, but I still feel, I think it conveys obviously the impact of it. Admittedly, though, Ryan Phillippe's character is still wearing glasses. I don't know how that would have happened, but, you know, small things. But nonetheless, I do think the movie, despite obviously not being able to afford some of the kind of the big VFX sequences, it still portrays, I think, the message well enough. Now, that's true of the kind of the lion attacks as well, that are obviously they've had to kind of scale back on budget here. Now, we're going to come on to that again, because I do feel that will be an issue for some. But it's really, it plays more of the kind of the Jaws card in regards to the lions. The lions are out there and they're this threat, and sometimes we'll see like a POV shot, or we'll see kind of footage of them as a kind of a threat which is looming out, but it's not like a movie which is gory or kind of graphic in regards to kind of lion attacks. and you more see the kind of the aftermath and how it affects the characters. So it's trying to go for more of a character-driven kind of way of doing things, which I think for some at least, and certainly for me, I didn't necessarily mind too much on that, because I do think it kind of still it showed us the aftermath of the blood and the kind of like the people who were, you know, left alive and things, and how they were affected by it. So I think in a way the filmmakers were smart here. If they couldn't afford to show it, I would rather see them right around it rather than kind of having bad VFX. The acting, I gotta say, I think is fairly solid. There's one character who's like this kind of one of the kind of the snotty rich kid kind of tourist, who I think is a little bit weak. But I think Ryan Phillippe especially does a good job here as this kind of doctor slash missionary who's really kind of unraveling. I thought he did a pretty good job here, and I quite liked Emile Hirsch as well. Although there is some writing for him which I wasn't so as a fan of, but the acting was all fine. And like I said, I do think it layers in a variety of different threats. Primarily it's the lions, but we also have this kind of militia, along with a couple of other kind of dangerous animals. So it really does feel like that these guys are having threats on all sides, and not, you know, the fact that they haven't got much water and they're lost in the desert. You know, it's really kind of piled on. So I do feel this movie does kind of give you a good level of kind of tense kind of, you know, anticipation about what's going to kind of happen, how they're going to get out of it and stuff. So all that was pretty good. It's a relatively short film. I think it's 86 minutes, so it's kind of quite tight on the kind of the pacing and things like this. And there are a couple of shots that almost have like a dreamlike kind of sequence to it, and for the most part, I think on the technical level, it works pretty well. I was quite impressed with the way this movie, clearly on, again, a lower budget, I think managed to sort of somewhat kind of hide at least the majority of the fact that this movie clearly doesn't have tons of money to spend. But let me just transition to now what doesn't work. And just staying with that, even though I think it mostly works, towards the end of the movie, it does have a few kind of sequences where are kind of either sort of composite shots or green screen, and they do look a little bit fake looking, admittedly. But I think most of the movie, at least, you can kind of, I think, gets away with it. But just a few sequences sort of towards the end, I feel, let it down just a little bit. One of the big complaints I feel, there's two complaints that I kind of did read. Let me address them. The lack of kind of action on screen. So yes, there are lines in it, but we don't ever see a line attack actually in its graphic detail on screen. We see them stalking, we see the kind of the aftermath, and we hear them. Now, I didn't mind, to be honest with you, the fact that we didn't have the more graphic line attacks, because I think the movie does what it can to kind of give you that sense of what's going on without really tripping over itself and having bad VFX to kind of like show. So that, to me, doesn't mind. But I will say, for those of you who want to see a more up close and personal line attack movie, you may be disappointed with the fact that you don't get quite that on screen. And I think maybe they could have had maybe at least one shot here or there, just to kind of like give you that. Maybe one shot, just one shot I think would have been enough, but we don't really get any. It's just the kind of like the threat, the unseen threat, so to speak. And the other major complaint here is that the movie, some people feel it has a kind of Christian kind of message in it, which it kind of hammers home. Now, let me address this as an atheist. I'd read this kind of critique before I'd watched the movie, and when I was watching it, I was thinking, I mean, they're missionaries, I guess, but that's a good reason why they're out there. To me, that didn't really seem a problem, and I didn't really see the connection, to be honest. In actual fact, there was one part of the movie where one of the casts actually says, I'm going to do it on faith that I'll be okay. And let me just say, maybe things aren't quite as okay as they think it's going to be. So I was thinking, maybe that definitely is kind of like, if anything, is anti-religion. However, then we get to the end of the movie, And there is one sequence which I was like, ooh, okay, now I understand why people are saying that. It's one sequence that I think it really tips its hand a little bit too much on that one, and it does come across as a little bit on the nose and a little bit cheesy. But I don't think it's too much. I mean, like I said, if you are a Christian, you're kind of gonna buy into that. And if you're not a Christian like me, for me that wasn't enough to kind of like derail the movie. But it was heavy-handed, and it's just one sequence, but it's not throughout the movie. So again, I'm not gonna critique it personally for that one, because I didn't think it was all throughout the film. It was just this one sequence towards the end. So there is kind of that. I mean, other than that, what else can I say? I do think there is decisions here that seem a little bit like foolhardy from characters, and then just some kind of like small little design like things that were logical. As I mentioned, like the smallest, like Ryan Phillippe's glasses not coming off during a plane crash. Again, it's like the little things. But for example, they're kind of trying to just stay by the kind of the wreckage of this plane, and they've built a fire to try and keep the lions away, and then they're kind of, there's a character taking shelter in the kind of fuselage of the plane. But I thought the fire was just a bit too far away. It's like, why wouldn't you build it nearer, just to stop them from coming around the entrance to the kind of the bit where you're sort of hiding out and stuff? Why not kind of, there's plenty of wreckage around, why aren't these characters kind of like fortifying where they are to try and stop lions from entering that they're kind of the area where they're taking shelter? They don't try to build up any type of barriers or defence or anything like that from the kind of the bits and pieces that are kind of lying around. So it was a little bit of a kind of like movie logic, if you know what I mean, especially if, I mean, you can maybe understand the tourists might not kind of think of that, but we've got a guide here, and we've got people that have been clearly kind of like, well, living in Africa, that sort of thing. You would maybe think these people would think of a bit more practical kind of situations like that. Like the radio in the plane never kind of really addressed things. There are some things here that sort of don't make sense. There's a decision towards the end of the film that Emile Hirsch, his character's makes, which I thought, I don't know if that really kind of would have happened, or it seems a little bit of an odd choice. Let me just say that. There is a couple of sequences where I do feel it does get a little bit more violent. It's more involved with the kind of the militia, I would say. But it is largely a kind of somewhat kind of bloodless affair, considering there is a variety of different kind of dangers in this movie. And then finally, some of our kind of like touristy characters don't really get any characterization, so we know they're red shirts at the end of the day. Anyway, it's actually somewhat of a kind of average movie in some ways. I think it's watchable. If you don't mind those critiques that I've said to you, I think you have a good time with it, because I enjoyed this movie. I didn't think it was a bad film at all. In actual fact, I'm going to give this movie a 6 out of 10. So actually a slightly above average mark, because I was engaged in the plot. I didn't mind so much the kind of the budget restraints that this movie was forced to make, but I feel some people will mind that. So bear that in mind. For me, it wasn't so much of a problem, but I do think it might be for some. So a 6 out of 10 for me. Have you seen it? What did you think of it? Please do leave me a comment, and I'll look forward to seeing you next time. Bye for now.